Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Insight webinar number 10, Designing an Apprenticeship Programme from Square One. We're here today because we have a common challenge, and that challenge is the apprenticeships levy. Now, for some of us, apprenticeships are new. For others of us, they're much more part of our business model. Now, we've written this session today on the assumption that you, or if you're a college, your clients, are organisations who are either putting in place a programme for the first time or are having to significantly modify an existing programme in response to the apprenticeship levy. We assume that you have a levy payment that means you need an apprenticeships programme rather than a programme for an apprentice. If the latter is true, then much of this would be unnecessary for your purposes. However, we also assume that if you need multiple apprentices, you are taking a longer-term view on the levy reforms and you are looking to put in place a future-proof programme. So, who are we? What gives us the right to advise you? Well, there's two reasons for that. The first reason is that we are a leading provider of apprenticeship services, and we're also the largest awarding organisation in the UK. We're owners of brands such as BTEC, EdExcel, the makers of higher nationals qualifications, and the owners of newer initiatives like the private university Pearson College. And the second reason is that we're also your peer. My colleague is going to give you a few figures in a moment, but we're a FTSE 100 company, we have a substantial levy payment, and a combination of the two means it's absolutely essential for our credibility that we not only get this right, but we are seen to get this right. And now, having been through the process, we're happy to talk you through what we did and the steps that we took to make it happen. Now, some caveats. You may already have done everything that you're about to hear, and if so, then that's great. Just take this as validation from your peers. You may have gone about things in a completely different way, and if so, again, that is fine. There's more than one way of doing this, and it's what works for your organisation at the end of the day. However, you may be right at the start of your journey. You may have nothing more than a blunt imperative from senior management, a deadline, and a whole heap of questions. And if that sounds like you, then please stay tuned because you're who we're aiming this event at. So who are we specifically? I'm Neil Linger, I'm the Head of Marketing for Apprenticeships at Pearson, and my role today is purely as event host. Our main presenter is Anne Ashworth, our Head of Internal Apprenticeships, the architect of Pearson's Internal Apprenticeship Scheme. And Anne has been working in apprenticeships for over 30 years now in colleges, in training providers, and in both large and small employers, so she's seen this process from every available perspective, and I will hand over to her now.
Welcome. So what I wanted to do this afternoon, and Neil's invited me to do, is to share what we have done in terms of Pearson, the employer, in getting ourselves ready for the levy. Now, we took the approach that we wanted to go live from the 2nd of May 2017 for numerous reasons, but really because of who we are and because actually it suited our business. So we did a lot of preparatory training to ensure that we were ready for that, and we launched with 30 apprentices in May with 5 training partners. So we don't deliver, we're not an employer provider, we use training partners. Currently, we have 70 apprentices with 8 providers. We have an approach where we do an intake of 3 cohorts a year, which is easy to manage as an employer rather than having a roll-on, roll-off program. And by the end of our cohort in January, we will have over 100 apprentices on program. And that actually is the target that we set for ourselves. No particular reason as to why we set 100, but we just felt that fitted our business. It fitted with the idea of a 5% club, i.e. 5% of our workforce would be apprentices by 2020. And it gives us that opportunity to meet the needs of the business by having this number of providers on board. And I will talk you through how we procured those providers a little later. We also have apprenticeship programs across 13 standards or frameworks, and we operate level 2 all the way through to level 6, which is the Chartered Management Degree Apprenticeship for us. So a little bit about our approach then, which I think is pretty standard for any employer that's looking at how they're going to fit in with the levy. I mean, we previously had our own SFA contract, and that was very much around our own employees in the business. It was principally level 2 and level 3 provision, and it was only in certain parts of the business. But actually now, with the advent of all the changes that are going on, this has given us a fantastic opportunity to rethink how we want apprenticeships sitting within our business. And the first thing was that we thought, you know, this isn't just about employed people undertaking an apprenticeship, but we've now got opportunities to really consider how we could look at our workforce strategy and bring different types of people into the business, perhaps looking at a broader range of age within our roles as well. So we now actually employ into apprenticeship roles. We work with partners that give us the opportunity to look at different pipelines into our business, such as traineeships, and that's also meant that we've now got younger people coming into the business, which does need to be managed. You know, this whole change needs to be thought about in terms of how you prepare your line managers, your hiring managers, and your HR team. Also, we're looking at how we can align our apprenticeships to graduate entry. It's not something we formally did as an organisation, but now we have that opportunity of linking that into appropriate apprenticeships at the right level, and also tailoring our internal training to the apprenticeship standards. So it really does give us a more rounded approach to the way that we recruit into our roles, but also how we manage our workforce succession planning. In terms of where we started, the key thing really was to make sure we had a very clear strategy. And in putting that together, it was important to make sure it wasn't too wordy, that it focused on the right things, that it could go forward to our senior management with them totally appreciating and understanding the messages that were coming through. It needed to align to the business objectives. It needed to align to our business needs in terms of skill set and where we're moving in the future, not just the current. It needed to take into consideration the way that we work with our recruitment processes, so for example, graduate recruitment. It also needed to take into consideration how different parts of our business operated. We have some very, very different types of businesses within our Pearson PLC title that operate both not just in the UK and England, but actually globally. And all of them have a very specific way of operating, if you like, different cultures in some cases. But certainly that meant that we needed to really tailor our messages with them and the offer that we put together. One key driver for us was also to make sure that we had a very good and solid approach to social mobility, and apprenticeships gives us that opportunity. It means, though, that as an employer you have to embed your apprenticeship thinking into your current systems. So, for example, your HR systems, your talent acquisition systems, so that you can monitor and you can track what's going on with your apprentices within the business, if you like, as separate entities to them being an employee, because you want to know, really, from a return on investment, where these employees stroke apprentices are going, their career progression within the business, the responsibilities that they take on. So all of that needed to be put into a very simple format. And literally, we just did a PowerPoint presentation in terms of high level and presented that to our senior leadership team, where we were challenged and asked questions about it. And then we put a more detailed strategy behind that. So in terms of that strategy, I think one of the key things we had to consider is where do the apprenticeships fit in with our leadership and development strategy. And bearing in mind, like many of you on this webinar, you will be a global organisation. That does present problems. You want to be thinking about how you can fit what is basically at the moment an English programme into your global way of operating. And what we did was say, okay, this is English, there are some things that are appropriate and some things that are not. And we dovetailed it very closely with our L&D team. So in fact, where there is L&D content that's appropriate for the apprenticeship, we've identified that. Working with our providers, we've mapped that into the standards, and that is identified straight away for our apprentices to work on as part of their apprenticeship content. And we've also worked out where internal training programs might be a precursor to an apprenticeship standard, and act as a pipeline through. So very much our thought process was that within L&D, the apprenticeship program was just another learning and development tool available to the teams that members of staff would go on to when appropriate, would move into something else to perhaps reinforce learning and embed their skill set, and then move perhaps into another apprenticeship later on. We certainly needed to keep senior leadership involved, and one of the things that's come out very strongly for us is that championing that they do on behalf of the programme. I think visibility of your senior leadership team to support the apprenticeships within the business is absolutely vital, and if you can have those ambassadors who are willing to speak up, put together articles, blogs, etc., it's hugely advantageous. And again, we keep our senior leadership team up to date with how we're doing. We keep it very succinct, we keep it very high level, but we also base it on, if you like, the performance measures that we are interested in as a business to show that the apprenticeship really does have the value that we believe it has. And you know, we've been running now for just over 6 months, and already we're able to report on some of the return on investment measures that we as a business would be looking for. So our approach to make sure that we were up and running for May was very much project planning. I was very lucky that I actually had a fully qualified project manager allocated. I was the technical expert. We put together a project team. We had a senior manager who was our sponsor, and we literally planned it all out in military precision. That gave us the opportunity to really involve the key stakeholders in the business. We could move them around in terms of their importance in what we were working on. We ensured that they were up to speed with things. So it was very much that awareness raising piece that needed to be done, because not everybody is familiar with apprenticeships, and certainly the levy at this time was really not something that very many people knew much about. But what that did was ensure that we planned backwards from our implementation date to where we were at that time. And I would say the same for you. I mean, you don't want to rush your implementation. You need to think it through very carefully. You need to plot who needs to be involved and who is going to be your senior sponsor. And then you need to work back from when you want to implement to the current time to work out where your priorities are. And for us, and I think for most of you, it would be the procurement piece for your subcontractors, your delivery partners, and your recruitment and selection. The reason for recruitment and selection was the fact that you're going to have to do an awful lot with your internal systems, the technology piece, to make sure that they are capable of matching what you're looking for from the apprenticeship program. Simple things like aligning your recruitment attraction strategy with the National Apprenticeship website and with the way that your providers are helping you with recruitment. You need to be thinking about the expertise in the talent acquisition team, so there's possibly some training needed. For procurement, if you do a really robust procurement process, then that takes time. You need to put them through the relevant stages to ensure that you've got the due diligence in place, and I would say just to make sure that they're fit for working with your type of organisation as well. So in terms of learning and development then, we very much, as I said, looked at our L&D strategy. And the thing you want to be considering there is you don't want duplication. You want your apprenticeships to add something to what you currently do. So that is very much looking at what you do, where it fits, where the apprenticeship is something very uniquely different, or where it adds value to something that you currently do. So we very much looked at that, and to be honest, we're still looking at that. It's not just something you do as a one-off. You have to continually keep looking. And now that we've got some great providers on board, we utilise their expertise to help us look at things. And also with new standards coming through all the time, that gives us new opportunities, but also it means you have to go back to what have you currently got in existence. It actually makes it really quite exciting because you can start to develop things from scratch and also align things to your own company values and culture. So I would say hugely beneficial. We don't do very many frameworks anymore. I think we only probably have customer service level 3 that is still an active framework. We're on standards for everything else. So again, that idea of what is a standard and the assessment plan, we align all of that with our internal training, and it gives us the opportunity also to continually upskill not just our L&D team but also our HR team and our talent acquisition team. So it very much is an evolving piece, but I would say gives you a lot of power and direction in scoping your learning and development for England, and possibly using that as a model that you could take into other parts of your business globally as well, or in other parts of the UK. Obviously, behind the scenes, we needed to do some other things, and we made some very clear decisions at strategy level, actually. One of them being that all of our apprentices would be on full-time permanent contracts, so we don't do contracts that are just an apprenticeship duration. We ensure that all of our apprentices have all of the same rewards and benefits as any other member of staff. We also wanted to make sure that we rewarded our apprenticeships and gave them motivational aspects to their programs. So we've put in a framework of success and recognition. And we also had to do quite a lot with, obviously because of that, with our HR team and our talent acquisition team around job roles, job descriptions, really around how the hiring managers or line managers could align a job role to the appropriate apprenticeship standard or framework. And where it's a specialism, so for example, creative and media, as an example there, we use our training partners to very much help and assist us with that. So our HR, our business partners, work closely with the manager. So for example, if it's an internal member of staff who's keen to do an apprenticeship, then it's a three-way conversation between the HRBP, the potential apprentice and their line manager to look at the appropriate standard or framework, and then they bring in the training partner just to confirm that their decision making has been accurate. We also had to do an awful lot around funding rules to make sure that we were abiding by them. Our recruiter in talent acquisition actually went on a training program with one of our providers to double check that her understanding of eligibility was correct. And we do a lot of work around that to ensure that we are absolutely on the money with regard to funding rules. We actually decided that we would do the initial assessment for all of the candidates that are put forward for apprenticeships, whether they're internal or external. That gives us visibility. It means that we have information on record in terms of Maths, English and ICT, but we give access to that information to our providers, and it works exceptionally well, I have to say. We also, I think the big thing for us in terms of the learning curve was the amount of development work that was needed with HR and talent acquisition. Now, I'm actually based in HR, and I think that works very well because I can turn to my colleagues and share with them what we're doing, but also do planning and training with them. But the actual apprenticeship program is situated in our L&D offer. So we're actually straddling both of what is probably key parts of the business where this should sit. I think that's a good plan. It gives me control. It means that I can embed the apprenticeship program within our L&D offer very happily because of the branding synergy that's in place. So some of the other things that we made decisions about, and that was that we would be very clear with all of our hiring managers and our line managers that when an apprentice is an apprentice, they're on a training role. What that does, it flags to our staff that they have to give the required support. Now, that's for the 20% off the job, obviously, but there's more than just that. There's giving them the time to work outside of that 20% specific. We also made a decision that we would give them 2 hours study time a week, which is catch-up time. We put in place mentors. So it's really important, and I think all of that support around the apprentice really does prove that they are in a training role. That stops hiring managers having too high an expectation of a new member of staff when they start a role. And bearing in mind that recruitment into apprenticeships is new for us, that's a little bit of a backstop in helping to make sure apprentices can get used to working, get used to their new role, and also get used to learning whilst working. So we did a lot of work around awareness raising with managers and other stakeholders in the business, and we also put together a pretty strong induction program for managers. We do one session every month for the first 4 months of an apprenticeship program, and they must attend all 4 of those sessions, whether it be face-to-face or remotely. We also wanted to make sure that we had a very inclusive program for our apprentices. We wanted them to have a voice in the development and the improvement of their program. So I've introduced a learner voice strategy whereby we give reward and celebration of success. We have a very tight measure of how apprentices are doing on their program. We have something called a brag rating, which is blue meaning brilliantly well done, ahead of target, green being on target, amber being an apprentice that perhaps is just faltering slightly, and red being ones where perhaps we are more concerned. They might perhaps have their probation extended, they might need an extra bit of support, perhaps attendance isn't great or something like that. But we share that with our partners and we all measure it in the same way and they report back to me. And every quarter, any blue apprentices go through our internal reward system. And we also are using a Pearson product that I'm really impressed with called Acclaim Digital Badging. And that gives me the opportunity to reward progress and development of apprentices throughout their program. And I've set up a series of badges that come out at certain milestones, providing everything is looking fine. And also I've created other badges for, say, ambassadors. So we've got some apprentices who are our ambassadors within the business. We have others where it's for members of staff that have really promoted apprenticeships or done something positive, and that's called an apprentice maker badge, for example. So we found that really, really well received by our apprentices and by their line managers. So in terms of the mechanics of the apprenticeship levy, your best friend is your finance director. We have an absolutely super person in our finance team who worked with me on setting up our PAYE systems. And as you probably know, I mean, because you're on here, you'll be aware of the background to the levy. So, you know, you've got to have a pay bill of 3 million, and it's 0.5 that goes to HMRC. The apprenticeship system is where it's all managed. And it all is managed through the PAYE. So actually your levy pot every month fluctuates depending upon the PAYE contributions. So in terms of using the apprenticeship system, it's really quite straightforward, and there is a former Insight webinar actually where my finance director and myself went through how we work with the apprenticeship system on a regular basis. But there's lots of stakeholders within the business that you absolutely need to work with. You know, the finance person, as I've said, absolutely critical. Procurement, even though we've been through our procurement process, we're still bringing on some specialist organisations. So that never goes away, and really great to have somebody who's got that understanding of the due diligence process. We're constantly referring to our legal team and tax team to ensure that, you know, we're doing everything appropriately. Technology team to make sure that we're embedding our systems appropriately with the company systems and processes, and sometimes that does take a while, so do plan for that. You know, don't expect that to be working within a couple of months. It does need a fairly lengthy lead-in time to make sure the apprenticeship tracking that you want to do can come through the systems. And as I said, HR and talent acquisition, absolutely critical. They are your voices within the business. They are the ones that are constantly talking to the people that could be interested in an apprenticeship, that could be putting forward their team members for an apprenticeship, and also thinking about the future. You know, I'm already planning for next year in terms of the latter part of next year with our HR team, and looking at what our workforce plans are for next year. So, you know, the HR and the talent acquisition team's absolutely critical as well. So in terms of tips for you, with regard to getting your head around the levy is read your employer or your provider funding rules inside out and back again, and keep that with you a bit like a Bible, just to make sure that when you're setting up your program, you've got everything in place. Because remember that the ESFA audit the providers, but they also check to ensure that as an employer you're complying with your agreement. Make sure you've got internal governance in place. And we have something called our Apprenticeship Advisory Group, which has got some of our original project group members, but now actually has more of a decision-making, a barrier removal type of process to it. In fact, I had a meeting today, and so vital to ensure that it's the overview of performance, but it makes sure that actually the apprenticeship is doing what you want it to do, and that any barriers, there are some decisions about how you can overcome those. Make sure you know who your stakeholders are, and they will change subtly over time, because obviously people leave the business, but also your needs change as you move through towards implementation and then into implementation. So identify who they are, make sure you communicate with them, make sure you do some upskilling of them in terms of apprenticeship and the levy, and then get some established processes in place. Again, you'll have processes that lead you through the project stage, and then you'll have your processes, your learning processes, when you go live. And if you're using training partners, then they will be able to help you with those processes, and to a certain extent they have a number of those already in place. We decided that we would actually take control over some of them. So, for example, some of the front-end part, because that sits with talent acquisition or our onboarding team, we take care of that. So the apprenticeship agreement is embedded in our contract. We design the commitment statement, but providers have all of that as well. But we wanted to make sure that anything that we had like that really was relevant to our business.
Okay, so before we go on, and we've had a couple of questions come in, just to reiterate what was down the bottom of the slide, and we're showing there is more detail on all of those issues in previous events, and you can get to that short URL, pearson.com/insight9. Okay, so a couple of questions have come in. The first one is a relatively easy ball to hit, and it's about the 20% off the job training. Is the 2-hour study time per week in addition to or part of the 20% off the job?
It's in addition to, but it can be towards the 20%. It's something that we put in because we knew that some of our apprentices would be doing functional skills, and functional skills is not paid for via the levy, so hence really technically doesn't come under the 20%. So it gives our apprentices that time to work with a trainer assessor on functional skills, and those that don't need functional skills, they've got some extra time to reflect, to work with a mentor or the line manager.
So that's something else that we
it's something additional. We just thought that it would be a good thing to do, and to be honest, it's worked exceptionally well.
All right, the next one is a slightly more meaty question. This may not have a simple answer. So this is a question from someone in an organisation with over 6,000 employees in the UK, so they're fairly large. How do you select people that could be upskilled? We're a business with 6,000 employees in the UK and finding it hard to create rules. And another question came in and just moved it off my screen, and finding it hard to create rules on upskilling apprenticeships. Do we upskill people who underperform / meet the requirements, or is it a promotional tool for the best performers as part of a reward mechanism?
Very good question, and one that did tax us. I think in the first place you tend to think it's about underperformers, but in actual fact underperformers, you will probably have another mechanism of dealing with them, and it might be short, sharp learning, supervision, that sort of thing. In terms of the apprenticeship, because it's a long program, I mean, let's face it, the minimum time is a year and a day, then you're really looking at a program that is about identifying talent, about retention, about upskilling those that have got a critical part to play in the business, where you know that you want to keep them, you know that you want to work with them and develop them. So we've got that approach in the main, but also we've got the talent piece, where we're identifying perhaps more senior people in the business who could benefit from doing the Chartered Management Degree Apprenticeship, and hopefully next year the Masters actually, where we really do have a specific routeway for them in the business. And we've got internal training, as I said, and what we have now is the opportunity to give accreditation to that individual, which perhaps they couldn't get before. I hope I've answered the question for you.
Yeah, no, very well. So another question, and this is jumping about a bit in terms of topic. This one is more about finance. How do you manage the case when an apprentice resigns after a certain period of time? Are we still forced to pay the levy throughout the full period?
No, you're not. It depends on when they leave the business. If they leave in the first 6 weeks of the programme, then the funding rules kick in and they advise you as to how to treat them. But certainly from a provider's point of view, they don't appear in their formal data. But as soon as they leave the business, you update the apprenticeship system with their leave date. And that is it. You no longer pay anything more for that particular apprentice. Our approach that we've taken there, that if an apprentice leaves the business, and they're going somewhere else and they would like to carry on with their apprenticeship, then I offer the service of talking to their new employer if they wish, just to let them know what we've been doing with them. If they're able to pull the levy down, or even if they're a small employer, then perhaps there's a benefit there for them continuing training. And also, if they would like, we can pass on our training partner to that individual and they can carry on with their programme. But one thing to say is that there should be no return required from an apprentice. If they leave during the programme, there is no financial requirement. It's very clear in the funding rules.
Okay, thanks very much. So those are all the questions for the moment. Please do keep them coming in. I'll hand back to Anne now to continue.
Lovely. So we're going to move into procurement. And you know, this does need to be considered very carefully. You know, this is deemed to be government money, even though actually as an employer technically it was ours, but because it goes through HMRC, it's government money. So you want to be as robust as you can be with your procurement process. And that very much is, what is it you're looking for? You could start with just looking at providers that are contacting you, and certainly you can use the apprenticeship system to seek out providers. But I think there are a couple of lessons that we've certainly learned that we put into our procurement that are really reaping rewards for us. And that is that we wanted providers that were not just good, and that's good as deemed by Ofsted or better, but we wanted providers that understood how we wanted to operate. And I have to say, we've been quite precise about what we want from our partners. And some of our partners have certainly perhaps been slightly surprised by how much we have set out in terms of a working relationship. But we provided them in our procurement process with a delivery model that said, this is how we want our partners to work with us. This is how we want them to work with our staff and our managers. We set out what we wanted as an account management service, and we also set out a schedule of works with a full set of KPIs, which I have to admit I did make really quite stretching, but I have to say all of our partners that are working with us have absolutely had no problem signing up to them. And of course for the first year, because of standards being so new, then we're all working on it together anyway. But what that has done, that has weeded out those providers that have come to us and said, yes, we want to work with you, but actually we're not prepared to work in the way that we wanted them to. We want a transformational relationship, not a transactional one. This is not about money entirely.
So just to emphasise this point, you're the employer, you're in charge.
Absolutely. It's our contract. You know, again, some partners have put forward their own contract. Okay, but it's not what we're looking for. So a little bit of negotiation, but every single one of our partners we're working with is our contract. And it would be very unusual for us to actually go with a provider's own contract.
And you would recommend that?
I would indeed, because it gives you the control. You know, you are buying a service and there's a lot of money involved in this, and you want to make sure that it fits the way that you manage things in the business. It might be around simple things like purchase orders and invoicing. How do you manage that? A lot of the contracts I've seen don't have anything about account management in them, and yet as an employer you absolutely need something like that. I would say it's imperative to have an account manager working with you from each of your providers, regardless of how many apprentices you give them.
Okay. Some of the people listening to this webinar their experience of the provider's attitude may be different. They may have experienced providers.
Well, I have experienced that, and I've just said no, that's not how we work, and thank you very much, but no thank you. Okay. Yeah. So very much tailor your procurement process to the way that you want to work. One of the things that we did in ours was very much ask for not just the paperwork side of the due diligence, but we wanted to meet with the providers. So we asked them to do a presentation, and we put in front of them a panel which was made up of apprentices or former apprentices and line managers, as well as the procurement team and myself. That was really, really useful because we got different perspectives coming in. And it gave that provider an opportunity to find out exactly what we were about. So it's very much a two-way process. And that went all the way through the procurement process right until the end of signing contracts. And we have, again, still now that two-way process. We have a lot of events with our partners, events that they run, events that we run, so that we're all working together. And I think some of my providers would absolutely say it's not something they're used to. But it's very unlikely that a provider would be able to service a big employer on their own. So you're going to have a number of providers working with a big company. And if you can actually get together as a group and share best practice in terms of, for example, performance reporting, which is exactly what's happening, it's hugely beneficial to everybody. And we have some specialist providers that we've brought on who are really quite small. So we're, again, using that opportunity to build up their knowledge and their systems and their capabilities. Absolutely nothing wrong with the quality of their delivery, but because they're small, they're perhaps not used to account management, for example. So that gives us that opportunity to assist with that. So very much that two-way relationship, as I've said. The 20% off the job, as an employer, we take that absolutely seriously. We made sure that all of our line managers, all of our senior managers totally understood what that meant. Nobody joins the programme unless there is a very detailed expression of interest process undertaken. So the line manager has committed to that 20%. We work with a number of providers, as you now know, and every single one of them does their programs differently. And as you also know, the funding rules allows flexibilities in that interpretation of 20%. And that means that we do work individually with each line manager and apprentice on what that 20% looks like. And also they negotiate between the two of them as to how that fits in with their business constraints, their team needs. We have times of the year for when that wouldn't be able to happen every week. So what they do is negotiate more time off in other weeks, for example. I think having a good relationship with your partners means that you can utilise some of the things they have access to. So, for example, different funding streams. The resources that are able to produce are superb. And to the extent now where lots of other parts of the business are looking at our partners in terms of perhaps commercial training as well. I can't say enough the account management piece. It helps the relationship enormously. It means that you have prompt resolution of issues. There's a really good understanding of what might be behind perhaps a problem that pops up. There is definitely a trust that comes up there. Our performance reporting is quite stringent. We actually require weekly reports as well as monthly ones, and we also have bi-monthly contract review meetings. However, that performance reporting means that both ourselves and our training partners know exactly what's going on, and I can double check with line managers that that is actually the case on the ground. So we've got a lot of visibility for every single apprentice. That leads into exceptionally strong communication. We know what's going on, when it's happening, we plan ahead. Simple things like we help book rooms out at our sites so that the training assessors can come in and assess or run workshops, we plan with senior managers so that we can get groups of apprentices together to have a joint workshop, for example. And one of the things that's very exciting now is that we're moving into joint development work with our partners. And as I said, looking at some of the new standards, looking at where apprenticeship structure might fit other parts of our global business, and looking at the expertise that they can bring into some of the things we do internally. So huge benefit for both employer and partner when you get that relationship working really productively. So in terms of senior leadership, I mentioned earlier about the importance of having them championing the apprenticeship program. I absolutely, think that it's important that any senior management team need to understand the apprenticeship. They need to understand its benefit to the business, but also, having the opportunity to meet with the apprentices and see what they're achieving for the business really does bring huge benefits. So we make sure that our senior leadership team are meeting with our apprentices on a very regular basis. In terms of myself, I am accountable, so I report to our advisory group, and I also do presentations for senior leadership. And it's about that regular reporting, but keeping it very straightforward. They don't want to know about some of the acronyms that sit within our apprenticeship world. They don't want to know about the individual nature of things, but they certainly want to know that we're keeping apprentices on programme, that they're on track, that we're getting good feedback from the apprentices, so survey results, for example, and also making sure that when we're putting our programmes together, that our culture is embedded in those programmes. I mean, we have something called Pearson Values. We've built that along with our training partners into some of the workshops, and we align our personal development goals in our system to those of the apprenticeship as well. So really important that this is all linking back into strategic objectives and business goals for the UK business, global business, and also the individual business units as well. So in terms of governance, I've mentioned that we've got our advisory group. But on top of that, we also ensure that we have strong contracting relationship with our partners. So we have a bi-monthly contract review meeting. The agenda in that review meeting matches the KPIs in the contract, though of course they've had to be adjusted because we're not yet at the point of, say, success rates. So what I do is look at the things that lead to high success, so attendance, retention, early leavers, etc. So those are in our agenda, and we go through that in great depth, and we use the data to back that up. We make sure that we link our governance experts in the business up with what I'm doing on the programme. And as an employer, we wouldn't necessarily need to do self-assessment and quality improvement planning, but we do. That's what our providers have to do to meet ESFA and Ofsted requirements, and we feel that we're here to ensure that those providers do well at, say, an ESFA audit or an Ofsted inspection. So we do have a quality improvement plan that we share with our partners, and we work through that. And the same with governance over the implementation and also the continued changes. We ensure that the membership of our advisory group is made up of people that really do have the ability to help the programme in the business. So they're people who know how to unblock problems, people who can make things happen, people who've got perhaps a wider knowledge of the business or a wider knowledge of the sector. And one of the things that we're very conscious of is that return on investment, like I'm sure you are as well. So yes, we have our performance KPIs for the programme, but also we're now looking at what KPIs we have as a business, what we would be looking for. So I'm working very closely now with HR on a talent dashboard to look at actually what we think are the good returns that we'd expect from an apprenticeship programme. And certainly it's things like improved employer engagement, retention, social mobility within the business, and also their take-up of additional learning because they've got so enthused with learning now. Quality assurance is a natural part of governance. We have a very strong performance review process of our partners. So we not just have the review meetings, but we actually observe practice. We audit the online learning platforms, for example. We look at the delivery models. We want to just make sure there's a lot of visibility about what they're doing, and anything that doesn't fit with what our expectations are or what we think is right for the business, then we have the evidence to go to the provider and say, I think we need to adjust this.
Okay, so a question, which I have actually been saving up since the very first slide, which is, of those key stakeholders, who tends to be most challenging and most demanding, who most reassurance about those programs?
I would say probably talent acquisition, because they're good at obviously doing what they do, but they're not used to apprenticeships and all the nuances with apprenticeship. Eligibility, for example, is not something that is a natural part of what they do. So I would say talent acquisition. I think it's also about understanding when their role starts and when their role finishes, and it becomes something perhaps that HR takes over. So yeah, but we're lucky. We actually do have a recruiter that's specifically for apprenticeships. The downside there is that for her, she's not looking after one division in our business. She's actually connected to all of them. So in terms of her understanding and what her knowledge, it's tricky. But yeah, I would think probably talent acquisition. Principally because they're so important to the programme.
Okay, and just to clarify, because I understand my mic was off as I asked the first half of that question, the question was which function has needed the most reassurance throughout the governance process?
Yes, talent acquisition. Okay, so in terms of communication, I think one thing that has perhaps surprised me more so than I thought it would is the amount of communication that you need to do in the business. Apprenticeships is misunderstood by some people. They've got a view of what it used to be rather than what it currently is. So a lot of preconceptions that need to be addressed. So key thing there as an employer is, how are you going to communicate internally? Who are you going to use? How are you going to do it over what time period? So actually thinking about people that could be your voices. So I've mentioned talent acquisition and HR, but also who else could be that? I mean, senior managers. I have some very good senior managers who've become very much ambassadors on behalf of the apprenticeship programme, and they're always out there speaking about it. You want to be thinking about different ways of doing that. I mean, we use videos. So for example, we've just launched our first cohort of chartered management degree apprentices, and we have a number of internal staff on that who have never done something like this before. So it's been a bit daunting for them. So we've got a lovely video of where one of them is talking to camera about their fears, but also their excitement about doing something like this. We have an internal social media, something called a Neo page. We have that as a one-stop shop in terms of resources and information. And then we also have an apprenticeship newsletter. There's actually was a work-based project from one of our former apprentices. So we try and use anything and everything to ensure that we're continually keeping people up to date with what we're doing, but also keeping apprenticeships in the mind of people, even to old-fashioned methods of putting posters up on our site walls, which worked a treat, I have to say, it really did. And we've also printed some brochures out that are sitting around. I have to say I've not even seen it yet. I can only assume that's because everybody's really keen and they've been picking it up to read it. So yeah, do think about your potential apprentices, who they could be, and that will subtly change. I mean, for example, the master's programme is now opening up a completely different level of person within the business that might like to get involved in that. The onboarding piece is really key, and not just for your new apprentices, but also for those hiring managers that are now becoming line managers. So we do a number of awareness-raising webinars internally. I run face-to-face sessions as well. I do one-to-one help sessions. The HR team asked me to do sessions to them as well. So there is a lot of communication in terms of awareness raising and continual information sharing on what's going on. I think this area of our sector is moving so fast with all of these standards coming through and loads more being approved as we speak, that there is always something new to be communicating out to the business, unless of course you're the sort of company that has a very specific need, your standards are in place. It will be slightly different. For myself, I run so many different programs across our businesses, and I can see already that I can have, for example, HR is coming on next year, sales standards, procurement's a possibility, things in L&D and also in teaching assistants, for example, might be useful. So, in recap then, lovely slide this one, which really sets out, without me saying anything, the 6 steps I would suggest that you follow to get yourself to a point of implementation. Get your strategy right, give that a really good thought process, get some key people involved in that thinking. If you know who your partners are going to be, then get them involved in that to help you, but certainly link in all your key stakeholders there. Make sure you work very closely with any L&D team that you've got so that you can maximise your internal programmes and link your apprenticeships in. It becomes an easier sell within the business if apprenticeships are seen as a natural part of the L&D offer. Make sure you've got somebody really good that helps you with PAYE and the apprenticeship system, and we've got a number of changes coming in over next year. By April next year we will have the transfer of funds. So things like that, where we've got changes to the system and changes and updates to the way the ESFA would like to work with the levy. You've got to have somebody on the case with that. Make sure your procurement is absolutely top-notch so that you get the right providers working with you. Senior management, and I would say at all levels within the business, from, in our case, heads of all the way up to our senior vice principals, and communication. And I think that's me. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anne. And I particularly like the comment about the brochure being key part of communication in the era of digital marketing. Goes against the grain, but there is a place for a bit of passion.
I have to say, I thought, what the heck are we doing? I've got an electronic version. But you know what? People seem to love that tangible holding on to something. And if I can't see it around, I must assume that people are reading it, or at least I hope they are. I hope it's not in the bin.
A couple of questions come in, and one of them, I actually quite like this question because I don't think in all of the series we've ever had a question directed personally to the presenter. And what was the hardest and also the most satisfying moment for you since you started to implement this program in response to the apprenticeship levy?
That's really interesting. I think the most stressful bit was the project management process, to ensure that we brought everybody together, we got the timings right, because we were so keen to be up and running for May, and we didn't really start the process properly until perhaps the end of September. So that was quite stressful doing that. What I find perhaps most rewarding now is apprentices on programme, doing something they're thoroughly enjoying, being successful, and knowing that, you know, all of the planning is actually working. There's still things that we didn't think of, or tweaks that we need to make, but that's all part and parcel of it actually. It will never be right first time because you want it to be better and better. But yeah, I mean, just seeing, you know, I go out and about, I'm always out and about seeing our apprentices on all of the sites, and the smiles are amazing. And that's not just from the young ones, that's from some of our mature people who had conversations with me to say, am I too old for this? Is this really right for me? And, you know, they're now saying, oh, I'm so pleased I did it.
Okay. And if a brief plug in response to that, our next event, number 11 in the series, is actually on degree apprenticeships, and we're going to be interviewing some of the people who have actually taken a degree apprenticeship as part of their progression as part of our apprenticeship program, including, and I believe this is correct, including one grandmother.
Absolutely correct. Absolutely. We've actually got 2 grandmothers on program at the moment.
career apprenticeships for grandmothers as well as for non-graduates. We are going to stay online just for a few more minutes for any further questions that come in, but if you don't have any questions and you want to move on, can I just leave you with a quick plug for our Twitter channel at Pearson APPR, where you will be able to keep up with the latest on apprenticeships, all the surrounding issues, more of these events, and the latest from Pearson in terms of the services that we're able to offer. Sorry, I am in marketing, I can't help myself. Our Insight newsletter will also bring said news direct to your inbox. You can subscribe to that at quals.pearson.com/apprenticeships, and at that address you can also find the remaining events in the Insight series. If you are new to this and you still have some further questions, please do check those out, check out the slides. You may well find the answers to what you're looking for there.